I would start, again, would be to go back to the Education USA Advising Center that would have resources that have been gathered over the years of universities that have a tendency to offer full or almost full scholarships. I'll be happy to talk about some strategies later as well, but when it comes to full scholarships, the reality check is that there is a very limited number of students, and the criteria could be a combination of factors. First, outstanding academics, leadership, English language skills. So the student would have to be an amazing student. But many times there are scholarships that could be based on diversity factors, that a university is looking to bring more students from a certain part of the world that they may not have had before, or they may have an endowment and a benefactor who is dedicating a certain amount of money to a student who comes from an underrepresented area. So one would be to look at the university's websites, to contact the International Admissions Office to ask them about that, but to first research the website before asking the questions, to ask the Education USA Advising Center, but to be ready for the fact that there is going to be a very short list with very large criteria to meet the caliber of a full scholarship. There are also sports scholarships, and many students who are outstanding athletes and good students can also look for full scholarships through the athletics departments of various universities as well.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Sure.
We have another question from India in the chat, and the question is asking about community colleges. There are over 4,000 universities, as you said, and universities and colleges in the U.S. How do the costs vary from school to school?
Okay, well, of course, I can't go through all 4,000, but what I can say is, as I mentioned earlier, there are universities that are state public universities and colleges, including 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges, and there are universities, 4-year universities, that are private and state supported. Community college is a great way to think as a strategy for funding education. And many community colleges have articulation agreements. That means if a student has successfully completed the first 2 years of general liberal arts study in a community college, that school has an agreement with a sister 4-year school for them to continue on and complete at the 4-year school from the same chain of universities. So community college is a great way to start and make it more affordable. The tuition will usually be much less. The possible downside is that not every community college, actually the majority, do not offer housing, so the student would have to look for off-campus housing. But when they do the bottom line math, it can still come out to be much more affordable to start and then transition to a 4-year university, whether public or private. So the range will vary greatly overall. All those costs that I mentioned earlier, anywhere from $30,000 to $60,000 a year, but there's such a variation in between there as well.
And of course, community colleges would be much less.
On the lower end, absolutely, absolutely.
Another viewer asks, is it possible to get a scholarship to study for a master's degree if you change the field of your studies?
Right, these are great questions. So I would say that one of the ways that graduate departments determine the good fit for scholarships is to see that the interested student is also interested in the fields of research or study offered by that department. If a student is switching, they may not meet or have the sufficient background. They may be admissible, but not necessarily admissible for scholarship, because scholarships from the graduate departments will be research or teaching assistantships. If you come from the same field and you're interested in a specific piece of research and that's what that department is doing, you're a really good fit to continue working with them and possibly getting some scholarship. If you're coming and switching fields, you may not be the right fit. At the same time, it very much depends. If you're going from engineering to business, for example, and you have years of experience as an engineer with leadership and management skills, maybe that could be a good fit. But the first place would be to contact the departments and the graduate admissions office. And I always recommend to graduate students to do a two-pronged query approach. One, the graduate admissions, to find out what the process is. But at the same time, to contact the department after the student has done their research. Who's on faculty? What are their research specializations? I happen to have those interests as well. And I say sort of turn on a light bulb with the department to get them interested in you, the graduate student. I have what you're looking for. I have this experience, or I have these academic criteria. I would very much like to be part of your graduate program. So the faculty could get interested in the student and say, I'd like to hear more about this student for scholarships. The admissions office is going to say, okay, here's the process to make that happen. So for any graduate student, master's or PhD, do your homework on what the department is doing and who's in the department, and then contact them as well as the graduate admissions office of that institution. And hopefully there could be some connectivity.
Excellent advice to contact more than one person at the university. Thanks for all these great questions. Really keep them coming in, and using the chat space or Twitter to use the hashtag #StudyInTheUSA. Evelyn, can you talk about timelines for financial aid for both undergraduate and graduate students?
Right. Well, I always say you have to plan ahead. A perfect timeline, optimal, is 18 months ahead of time. I know that in many, many parts of the world, that seems so unrealistic, because in your own country, you only maybe need to plan starting in April to be able to join a university that same year in September. But given that the United States works on deadlines, the universities have very early deadlines, and in many cases, for students who are looking for merit scholarships or financial aid, the deadlines might be slightly earlier. Planning ahead is a really good piece of advice, and I would say no later than 12 months ahead of time, but 12 to 18 months ahead of time is when you start doing your research. You contact an Education USA advising center, you go online, you do your homework, whether undergraduate or graduate, and you also begin having conversations with your family about the affordability of an education and thinking long term. If you're an undergraduate student, you need to sort of have a plan that is a 4-year plan. If you're a master's student, about a 2-year plan, and if it's a PhD student, at least a 5-year plan, depending on the field that you'll be doing. So combining looking up the resources in country through Education USA, looking at the university's policies and website, and having conversations with your sponsors and or family to have a long-term plan, if that happens between 12 to 18 months ahead of time, you're in a good place.
Thanks, excellent advice. It looks like some of our online participants are asking about working while they're in school to help pay for their studies. Is it possible to work?
Right. Well, according to current visa regulations, if a student is on a student visa, they can work up to 20 hours a week on campus with permission from immigration, and there is an office on everyone's campus called the International Student and Scholar Services. So they deal with immigration regulations. They also work with programming and adapting to transitioning to a U.S. university campus. But the law does allow for up to 20 hours of week of work on a campus. Personally speaking, from the students who have worked in my office over the last 8 years, I've had a variety of students. No one student could even give me more than 14 hours a week because of the academic obligations. The first job a student has is to be a student. So getting a little job on campus, legally it's allowed. You've got to have really good time management skills, and it's good pocket money. It will not finance your education, but you can do so. Now, over the summers, a student can request permission to work off campus up to 40 hours a week on a student visa during the summer period. And summer in the United States is from mid-May till about mid or end of August. So that could be a nice period of time if the student gets the job that has been allowed him or her to do. When a student finishes their education, under the current laws, if they're on a student F1 visa, they can stay in the United States for a year and do an OPT, an optional practical training program, as long as they are employed within a certain number of weeks after graduation and in a field that is related to the degree they studied, and that they have an employer who is going to hire them. But that would be work with a salary for a year to get that experience. And after completion of every degree, they can get that 1 year of experience after a BA or an MA or a PhD. These are not going to fund the whole budget, but they're good pocket money and help cover some of those expenses that therefore the student would not have to go back to their family and ask for.
Thanks, Evelyn. That's really good to know. A question is coming into us from Twitter. It's where can graduate students get better funding from state universities or private universities?
Oh, that's a very good question, and I don't want to generalize too much, but I would say, first of all, do your homework. Research and see what the universities are offering. Not only would it vary from state universities to private universities, but it could vary from department to department, because certain departments on the graduate level may have a grant to offer, and that grant may include hiring a teaching or a research assistant in field X. But that same school, that same university in another department may not have a similar funding mechanism. So it will vary from department to department, not just public or private. But if I had to answer this question in very, very broad strokes, I would say there might be more funding opportunities at the private university level, but the overall costs at a public state university are less in the first place. So practice. If a school costs $60,000 and they're giving you a $15,000 scholarship, you still have to pay $45,000, and that includes living expenses and tuition. If another university costs $32,000, including everything, you're still better off paying for everything at a public university than the private university that is offering partial as opposed to full. So it involves doing your homework, and it will be department specific on the graduate level.
Thank you. Good advice. Ravi asks, is there financial assistance available for international students studying in a certificate program? And can you elaborate on what a certificate program is?
Okay. Well, it's a good question. And from the visa perspective, graduate students can, a certificate program is usually a non-degree program. It could be a 10-month program in strategic planning, as opposed to a 2-year master's program in engineering with a focus on strategic planning. In today's, according to today's visa regulations, certificate programs are only available to graduate students and not to graduate students for those who need a student visa. If a student happens to have a US passport or a green card, that means a permanent resident status in the United States, then these restrictions would not apply. And I'm speaking on regulations that were in effect up to maybe October 2014. If anything changes, then of course one would have to contact the International Student Scholar Services. So certificate means not leading to a degree, but it could be a very comprehensive 4-month, 6-month, 10-month, even a year program, but not for a master's or other degree. If the question was whether scholarships are available for
Of
that,
course, yeah.
that again almost